Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Galactic Army. My name is Aaron, and with me, as always, is Jamie.
Hey, folks.
Jamie, you've been putting in a lot of work on this ODST build. We have a lot to talk about in this video today, isn't that right?
Yeah, that's about 2 months in the making right now, and this has been a huge project with a big deadline right at the end.
As of today, are just a couple weeks from our trip to DragonCon down in Georgia, where we will be debuting these armor sets.
Hopefully.
Hopefully, yeah. We've done a lot of work on them so far, so we're going to be covering a lot in this video. We're mostly going to be focusing on 3 techniques that you're going to need to know to assemble vac-formed armor kits like this one that we got from Sean Bradley. We are also going to be covering how we paint all of this armor. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. So starting with the chest, it comes in 4 main pieces. Our job right now is to essentially rivet them all together, assemble them as one solid piece, right?
Yeah, that's right. There'll be a series of joins that we have to make. Now, these joins will allow a little bit, or even actually quite a lot, of flexibility because they won't be permanently bonded together. They will have these metal pieces that will hold them together and allow for a good range of movement.
What tools are we going to need to bring this all together?
Most importantly, you will need a rivet gun or a riveter, also known as a hand rivet tool. And all this essentially is a piece of metal and a couple washers, and it will be put through a piece of metal and it will pull the metal through itself, basically creating an almost like of a mushroom effect of the metal, and will hold the 2 pieces together just with a little bit of pressure.
Yeah, it's just applying, pressure, bending the metal, kind of creating that pressure that holds everything together.
Side note, it took everything in my power not to say it'll create a mushroom head or a mushroom tip. You're welcome.
So what else are we going to need?
More importantly, we will also need a drill to create the holes that these pieces will go together. Also, a very useful addition to this would be metal washers, and this will just help distribute the pressure created by the rivet tool when you are pulling the metal through itself.
And what about these long plastic pieces? These are some of the pieces that we saved earlier when we were trimming out the armor, correct?
Yeah, and a lot of kits will also come with some extra pieces as well. Sometimes it's just intended to use these bridging pieces, which can also be referred to as shims. Now, they will act as our connection piece. A lot of vac-form pieces will actually be concave on the back, almost hollow, and that will not make it easy to apply 2 hollow pieces together. There will be no points of contact between them, and so that's why we have these shims. Now, you'll see when I'm working on this chest piece, I'll be creating these sort of 90-degree bends, and this will just allow me to attach these pieces together by drilling a hole straight through one piece, in through the other, and then placing a rivet through both, and then using this rivet tool where I will apply pressure on the grip and it will pull a small, almost like a nail, through the rivet, and will just create that pressure and just rivet the pieces together. It will hold the pieces by creating equal pressure from the back and the front, and will have a strong hold made of metal.
Yeah, I imagine it's a very strong hold. And you're just using a lighter to warm up those plastic 90-degree bends in order to shape them.
Yep, and just some pliers just to make that bend a lot easier and a lot safer on my fingers.
Mm-hmm. And so Sean covers a lot of the specifics of each piece in his 88-page tutorial.
A very thorough 88-page tutorial, and he'll tell you exactly what size of piece that you need. He will tell you where to bend it. It's incredibly thorough and incredibly useful. It made this build so much easier than it would be otherwise.
Right. And the rivet tool is something that you're going to need. Does he mention a specific size of rivet?
Yes, they are 1/8 inch rivets. They are just the right size that it'll create a good hold, but they won't be too cumbersome and they won't be too large and distracting. They'll actually create a really nice practical look to your armor as well. It will make these look really industrial by having actual exposed, used rivets across this armor.
How many rivets do you think you used in the entire build? If you had to give an estimate.
If I had to give an estimate for each set of armor, I would say around about 50, 60, 70 rivets.
Okay. Yeah, so good sizable amount. That should give you a good indication of like how often you're going to have to use this technique.
Yeah, you will get some good forearm grip strength through this. Let me tell you.
And so like this riveting technique can be applied to a lot of other different vac formed kits. The bridging technique as well. Like you mentioned, most vac formed kits have a hollow interior, and sometimes that doesn't leave a lot of space to actually connect it. And so those bridges kind of fill that gap in so you have something to latch onto.
That's exactly right. It'll also help you put together two pieces that need to become one, which actually leads us perfectly into our third main technique and main tool in our arsenal of making armor.
And that's going to be using our slurry to actually chemically join multiple pieces together. If you remember from the original trimming video, we kept all of those trimmings. We talked about it briefly in some previous episodes, but now we're going to do a deep dive into the slurry filling aspect of this armor.
The main piece that we'll be using this slurry technique on the Sean Bradley build is just the calves, is the only piece that requires this level of seam filling. Now, if you are using a kit such as Imperial Surplus or 850 Armor Works,
Right, for like a clone trooper.
for a clone trooper or any of the other troopers, this is a very common technique that will probably be about 90% of your build.
Yeah, it's critical for those builds as far as I know.
Yeah, and it will be commonly used across that. So this is a great technique to get to know for a short build here that will allow you to go and make seamless builds in the future.
So just as a refresher, the slurry uses the scraps that we cut off from the kit pieces, and they're soaked in acetone over about like a night, would you say? Maybe 24 hours?
Yeah, 24 hours, 48 hours, depending on the material you're using, whether or not it is HIPS or whether it is ABS. They have a little bit of a different melting rate.
Right, but they turn into this slurry, like an ooze, depending on the ratio that you do. For the HIPS plastic, it was a little bit different from ABS. We just, I believe, went full sail on the acetone, not really worrying too much about the ratio.
Oh yeah, we soaked it.
Just trying to get it to turn into a sludge. But this slurry you're going to be applying along the seam line of the calf on the backside. And then over time, over another, like I think we waited 24 hours, all the acetone will evaporate out of that plastic and it will actually return to its original, like hard, rigid consistency.
Yeah, it'll basically form a plastic all over again, which simply means it is sandable all over again. That means you're able to just sand it smooth, apply Bondo, and fill in those gaps to make it relatively seamless. Now, in Sean Bradley's build list, he does say that the calves on the back of an ODST actually have in-game a seam line.
Yeah, you love to see it. I know with the clones, you are trying desperately to hide all of your seam lines, but with the ODST, you can let them be a little bit visible.
Yeah, you don't have to look like a CGI creature, unlike a clone trooper.
Yeah, it makes you wish. I know a lot of the clones in Kenobi actually had seam lines. It just made a lot of people rejoice.
Yeah, because a lot of people sad that they, like us, built entire clones that were
like a bunch of chumps. But on the back of the calves is basically the only place we really use the slurry method. But if you're doing other vac form kits that use ABS or different kinds of plastic, it's a method you'll most likely be familiar with.
So now that we've covered the three main techniques here used in building a Sean Bradley kit, these techniques can be used in many different builds. And these are really good key prop making tools that you can use in the future.
Right. Once you get a basic handle on the riveting aspect, bridging, and the slurry, you can be pretty dangerous with vac form kits. That'll get you pretty far in a lot of different kits. So now that we have the armor all assembled, it's time to paint it. So similar to the assembly parts of the armor, we're going to cover the techniques in general, and we basically use these techniques across every piece of the armor. Now, the first thing we want to do on all of these pieces is apply a nice silver base coat. Jamie, what is that going to do for us?
So this silver base coat will allow our armor to look like it's metal. Whether or not it is, this ABS or HIPS plastic, if you apply a nice metallic base that you then use as a weathering step later down the line, it will make everything just look a lot more realistic, a lot more manufactured, but in some war room and prepared for a soldier.
Basically, all that we're doing here is tricking people into thinking that these plastic parts are actually metal and have actually been out on the battlefield and have experienced a lot of different wear and terrain and all sorts of different things.
But how do we show off this metal if we're just going to cover it later with our nice colors?
So a material that we like to use is called liquid latex. It's actually largely used for like special effects makeup. Say if you wanted to make yourself look like a zombie or apply like a big old wound on your face, you use this liquid latex, which starts as a liquid, but then will start to, after like 20 minutes, it'll then start to thicken up and can actually like feel like rubber. So we're going to paint that onto the silver base coat in strategic points, making sure to hit a lot of the sharp corners, a lot of the hard edges, anywhere that we want the silver paint underneath to be popping up after we've moved forward with other colors.
And there's a lot of techniques in applying liquid latex that you can use. Now, commonly, a lot of people will just use a small paintbrush, something disposable, because it'll often soak into the bristles. But some people I know like to use toothpicks to create a sharp effect, as though some shrapnel has just dinged off the side of the armor piece, or even some chip brushes, because those big, thick bristles on those disposable brushes will create really thin streaks of this liquid latex that you can rub off later. It looks fantastic.
It reminds me of scratches given to you from like concrete. You know, it's a nice level surface, but it's very rough. And so what you get is a lot of small streaks in the same direction. And those chip brushes are great for that.
And there is a method for saving your brush just a little bit. Now, it's not going to be perfect, but if you soak your brush in dish soap and a little bit of water, it will actually create a bit of a film over your bristles, enough that will stop the liquid latex from soaking into it and just rubbering up your brush.
Yeah, I would definitely not recommend using your best brush for this part. The chip brushes we get are like 79 cents or something like that.
At most.
You can use one and basically get very far with the armor at this step. So please do not ruin your best brush doing this. But this liquid latex is going to act as a cover for that silver paint underneath. It's going to protect it, so that when we paint on our base coat of Montana Gold Basalt, that silver is going to remain underneath. You want to be careful, because when the liquid latex cures and becomes a rubber, it can be pretty easy to rub off on accident.
That's a good point.
So just be sure to handle it gently. Try not to accidentally rub it off with your hands or anything else while you're painting.
And the best advice we can probably give is consider what story that you're trying to tell through your weathering. If there's just some blotches of liquid latex around, it won't look that realistic. But if you start hitting corners, if you start hitting the outside of your armor to make it look like shrapnel has just blasted past your original character, make it tell a story about where you're placing your scratches. You need to think about this early on.
I would say also, don't fall into the pit trap of making things uniform. At this stage, completely random, or at least random effects, is what looks the most realistic. Because life is unpredictable, you might lean on your right side more than your left. So maybe your right arm has more damage, shrapnel, or things like that. It's an opportunity for you to tell a story with your armor.
I like that. That's a really good point about the leaning on one side. I never thought about that.
So maybe if your character is like a commander that stays at the back, maybe you have less weathering. If your character is a frontline grunt, maybe you have a lot more weathering. Maybe you have more on the front compared to the back, because it's always cooler. You don't want to take a bunch of damage while you're running away from something. But the possibilities are basically endless at this stage. Just keep these things in mind and tell your own story with your armor.
And speaking of telling your own story about your armor and your character, this is where you can start adding on your own accents. Now, matching our helmets, we started adding on some extra colors and details to our overall armor. This created a good theme across all of our armor that just brought everything together. Now, we each did our own original character, which is why, in my case, I used greens and some off-whites, whilst Aaron used some blacks and some deep blues to cause nice accents across his armor. Now, before applying these colors, you can still add more liquid latex to your base color so that there's different levels and depth in your chipping.
The liquid latex is basically just to protect and save whatever paint you have on there at the moment. If you're going to be adding more paint, it will not apply to the places that you have liquid latex. So after you have all your accent pieces done, you are happy with the paint job, now is the time to peel off that liquid latex. You can either use a tool like a gentle scraper. I just use my fingernails. It's a dirty job, but don't trim your fingernails for a week and you'll be good to go.
I like to use a toothbrush to do it. I just make sure not to steal my wife's, unlike
the makeup brushes.
Unlike the makeup brushes. Yeah.
So one way that we decided to make our characters more unique to us is applying different sets of stickers and decals across all of our armor. Jamie, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so we recently got the Silhouette Cameo 4, and this is just a decal maker. It's a sticker maker that just is a printer that just cuts pieces of paper.
Right. Think Cricut, basically.
Yeah, it's exactly that. And we designed a few different decals to place around our armor, and this just essentially made our armor look a little bit more real world. It added some realism to the look because, of course, if you're a member of a military organization, you would have your military on your armor. You would have potentially your name, some customizations, some logos, which are all accents that we decided to add across our kit. And it just gave some visual interest to the kit and broke up some of those colors by adding some whites and some blacks and some other interesting little accents and details that really made this kit feel like our own original character.
Right. And a lot of these decals we got actually free from the 405th forums. I'll be sure and leave a link to the page that we used that included a lot of them in the description. But now that we've peeled off all that liquid latex, the silver underneath is very bright. And so I like to think that the silvering in the liquid latex is kind of the long-term serious damage. Now we need to apply the short-term kind of day-to-day damage, the grime, the dirt, the dust, anything that can build up over your armor that is less serious, that isn't not, chipping away paint, but this is really going to bring it to the next level, make it look like it was plucked off of a battlefield.
We use several different techniques that really create the image that we designed. Going into this, we had an image of what our characters have been through. And so you have to choose your weathering to match that. If your character hasn't gone through a lot, there is no point applying an oil wash and making a lot of chipping. Or if your character's on a snow planet, it's not going to make sense that they have a lot of dust. So with our characters, we want them feet first into hell. They're going to be in the middle of a dirty battlefield. So we're going to have our armor be dirty, grimy, with a lot of soot, of carbon scoring that really looks like they are in the middle of a battlefield or in New Mombasa.
Yeah, exactly. And you hit the nail on the head with the different terrains or environments. I've seen ODSTs that look more like they've been, in a desert canyon. If something was like on an ice planet, would look completely different from a desert planet. These are all things to consider when building your kit. I feel like the oil wash and the techniques that we're applying here are kind of the most generic. They can apply to a lot of different terrains and planets or environments, but you can definitely play around with it a little bit more. Maybe if you wanted to, like say you were from Mars or something, apply a lot of red dirt around the creases or in the recessed areas.
Oh, that would look cool.
You could definitely play around with it a lot. The oil wash is basically just mixing some oil paints with some thinner that will thin oils. In this case, mineral spirits, applying it all over the armor and then just brushing it off with a paper towel.
Yeah, and that will just leave a little bit of residue, and depending on the pattern of how you wipe it off, you can really tell a story as well. And especially about how thorough you want to be when getting rid of this oil. You can leave a lot inside recesses, in edges and corners, and it will just look as though it has been through a lot and you have not had time just to give it a proper clean.
There are other techniques as well to further enhance the weathering. You like to use an airbrush and filling in some of those recesses with kind of a general black or darker colors.
That's right. And in my mind, that enhances the colors on the flat, open areas of the armor by really creating a natural shadow in the deeper recesses. It causes, in my mind, the colors to pop. And that's something I really like in a lot of my work. But there's plenty of techniques that you can use to tell the story that you want.
And if you want to hit specific pieces more than others, feel free to stipple in some oil paint and hit those spots extra hard, or 2 or 3 times. You can really adjust it to your level of comfort and how you envision your character.
And after you do all of this work, making sure that your armor looks exactly how you want it, well, you want to make sure it stays that way. Natural weathering is great, but you want to make sure that your hard work stays on your armor. And the best way to do that is with just a simple clear coat. Now, if you're going to be weathering armor with oils and airbrushes and stippling on metallics and further dark colors, it doesn't really make sense to add a big glossy sheen over all of it. So we like to use a matte clear coat by Rust-Oleum. And this will just create a top coat that will create a semi-scratch resistant barrier to stop all of that hard work getting rubbed off when you're eventually out trooping or hitting a convention.
Right. It's very non-impactful on how all your paints look. It can do a great job at uniforming everything and pulling things together.
That's a very good point.
I had actually in my kit switched blacks halfway through because I wasn't happy with the can that I was using. And it looked a lot different. Some of the blacks had a little bit more gloss or reflectivity to them. Looked more satin. And this matte clear coat really brought it all together, made sure the blacks looked the same from the matte black that I switched to and the satin black that I had started with. This clear coat really brought them together and made them look much more similar than they did during the entire weathering process. Okay, Jamie, so with all that covered, we have our armor all put together now, but unfortunately we have no way to put it on our bodies and make sure that it stays there. So in the next episode, we're going to be covering rigging, the soft goods that we're going to be wearing underneath the armor, and we're going to be doing a full suit up in this armor. I'm very excited for it. What about you?
Oh yeah, we're nearly there. Not long now until Dragon Con. It's going to come right down to the line, but I think we can make it.
So with these three main techniques in mind, you are going to be very dangerous with vac-formed kits. You can complete a whole lot of different kits out there. There are plenty by plenty of different makers. And if you use these painting techniques, you can end up with a amazing looking realistic set of armor. We're going to end on a bit of a weathering montage. Jamie, it took you how long to weather a complete set of armor with an oil wash?
I went through every single piece in around 35 minutes. All it took was, I'd say a cup and a half of oil paint and mineral spirits, and I just went to town on the whole thing, and I think everything came out looking so good in the end with just one pass.
What'd you say you did? You put on both headphones and you're like, I need to disassociate for a little bit.
That's exactly it.
See you in half an hour.
Yeah, I time traveled in that moment, and everything around me was done.
Well, Jamie, I am so happy with how the armor is coming out. We are very close. Can't wait for you guys to see all the work that Jamie has put into this. And remember that we will be attending Dragon Con, ideally with these kits in tow. And we'd love to see you and say hi, shake hands, take pictures. So if you're planning on going to Dragon Con, be sure and check out for updates on where we'll be and when we're going to be doing meetups. Until then, I hope you all enjoy. I hope you're feeling confident enough to take on a build like this yourself, because honestly, it is not as scary as you might think. And Sean is such a legend for making a full 88-page tutorial on putting all this together. We are kind of just compressing it all into a short video. So thank you again for watching. I hope to see you again in the next one.